So c'è, se oggi un docente che senti corsi broda.
So for the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at going for refuge to the three jewels, the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel.
And ma dirin shue dang zuge kisin da chen ju simbe chola yang si de kirin gon cho tyaba chimbe chen ju semba sa ji ma song yo ma re. Da din ma da chen ju sembe ke chen ju semba ni wi se yi sa de an di ko ma de le ya jap su de jem de ko shi ko re chen ju semba ni wi se yi sa ji. Do. chen ju semba ni wi se yi sa de. Da ji da chen ju semba Nivi se ye se di, Jeju Semba Kundu Sangbo se da, ane Jizun Chenpe Yang se da, ane ngan juge se Chenje Si che, ane Namge Nyingpo che, Sei Nyingpo che, Jamba, Jiba Namse, Chana Dor Zikie del Ya, ane Jeju Semba Nivi se ye se ju Sungore.
And last week, when we looked at the going for refuge to the Sangha jewel, it was mentioned that in the unique Mahayana or the uncommon Mahayana refuge, one goes for refuge only to Arya Bodhisattvas as part of the Sangha jewel, not to other Arya beings. And so now we're continuing in the text. In the next section, it is going for refuge to 8 great bodhisattvas, or the 8 close bodhisattvas, being close to Buddha Shakyamuni. So these are a part of the Sangha jewel. So these 8 close bodhisattvas are Vajrapani, Shittigaba, Sarvani Nirvana, Vishkambini, Manjushri, Akshagaba, Maitreya, Vajrapani, and Chenrezig.
And so, the Ajik Nanjui, La more na Sangiris, and the Jesu Simbi, Tudembare, Saji on the Nisungore.
So these 8 close bodhisattvas are actually, in essence, Buddhas, but they've taken the aspect, or they're showing the aspect of being bodhisattvas.
Dine zadang ma dusine japsu ko ne divasha de la atsi de la dani jibe namtra ne kundu sangla dani bu jambe yang la dani ye dagi lu de ulwar ki saji.
And in the broader context, in the terms, because we're in the section on purification, this is under the opponent power of reliance. So this is then, one is relying on the Sangha jewel of these, as represented by these 8 great bodhisattvas. So coming then to the 49th verse. Filled with dread, overcome with anguish, to Samantabhadra I give myself, to Manjughosha of my own accord I offer this body of mine.
Na dani jigbe namtra ne se de nang zu ji da ma zu japsu zhi ge japsu zhe la dang bo jamzhu gyuni yo ro gyuni japsu zhi gyuni se de nga zu nam yin jamzhu she de japsu zhi gyuni se de gyuji de ga res na ko wa da nga su dunga de le ji xin zha ba ji de le ta gu du sen be sam lo jo ro wa de nga zu japsu zhi ge gyu shi che dan denige tangbo korwe dunga digi pa nga sondang korwe dunga digi samda denige dunga digi pa kanga dene kanga pe je sene pe chik dele ya jishin dene dele ya an dele kanes tagina sibe ngamda kiya jorwa jishin traba se di chikche an denige kiya de ta dele gyobe nyuba de sul yore labde da kemne konjo sumla yore se de ta nyuba di gyobe nyuba de kebde konjo sumla yore se ha go ya de gyuchi gyuni sha gro dene hakwene dene ge an dele kyobe nyuba kyabne konju sumi tende kyoburi sampige yiche kele na yiche be damja de la ane kyamrong ne sigirwa kyamrong ye sigirwa dang numgin chidanwa dina shin re dadi dade chen yusamba kundu zambo de chembe yang konzula kyapsu juyo ne kyabri kedu dani jiba namtra ne sidu dangbo nga juge da sedo sosorana an rang da shen semje tamje jiba sedu korwe jiba kiwi kasi chiwe jiba naiwe jiba ane jige kiene shine ane nga sondo kiene nga sunge dunga le jiba ane dene ge ane korwe dunga le jiba ane 동아 디술이야 직비게 삼단의 직바 동아디게 직바게 되네 네 텔레간에서 타기나 셈비게 되네게 남자시나 남자 중고래세 다네 집바 남자네세 지산디 디 접수주 유럽 차거로와 되네 인자다 되네기 남자 깨는데 다 텔레 교바도 술려래세도 전시선 먹고는 상벌 교비 니바도 요래스 대행장에 전시선 먹고는 상벌이야 안에 접수주 인세로와다 되지.
As we looked at a couple of weeks ago, there are two causes for going for refuge or going for protection. The first is coming to recognize the sufferings of the lower realms in particular, but actually the sufferings of samsara in its entirety. One generates fear for all this potential suffering that will continue to befall one life after life. So the first cause for going for refuge is fear. The second is independence on having given rise to fear for suffering or fear of pending suffering. One thinks, who can protect me from such suffering? And there one, with faith, goes for refuge to the three jewels. So these are the two causes for refuge, fear and faith. And of the three jewels, the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, the Sangha jewel, the Dharma jewel is the actual refuge in that when we cultivate the Dharma jewel, in other words, true paths and true cessations in our continuum, we have refuge, or to use alternative translation for refuge, we have protection within us. So now to look at the verse in the first line, filled with dread, overcome with anguish. So this refers to the first cause for refuge, fear in relation to the one's impending death and the potential for rebirth anywhere in samsara, and in particular fear for rebirth in the suffering lower realms. So in dependence on one's prior meditations, one can give rise to this cause for refuge of fear in relation solely to the fear for the potential of falling into the lower realms, or in addition to that, if one has reflected on the sufferings of samsara in its entirety, one can give rise to fear for ongoing, uncontrolled rebirth in samsara. So in this way, one gives rise to go for refuge. One gives rise to first fear, as expressed here, filled with dread, overcome with anguish. And then with faith, one turns to, and here turns to the Sangha jewel, as represented by the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra. So in the second line, to Samantabhadra, I give myself.
Denegeda jibigin, jishingangra kihadu, and Delia and Jiki Gubin Nubadi, Suliores and Changes Sembokunda Sambola, your SH Tonje, and they in that Changes Sembokunda Sambolia, and Jiki Dele Changes Sembokunda Sabi Yoguri, Sembiki, Yiche Biget, Dam Jana, Japsutroinza, Changes Semba, now Kundu Sangla, Dani Bu, Seta, Kundu Changes Sembokunda Sambola. 다이 델레큐비 뉴바데다 전시무 군도 상벌 요 전시무 군도 사비 교구리 했으면 다 되네게 소수교 류 롱주 소수교 롱주에다 류 차상 야 전시무 군도 상벌 부기 부르시네 아니 잡수족이 있어 부이시네 잡수족네 디바 샤게 있어 되네게 디바들레 콜위 동아 직바 나솔래야 그래서 콜위 동아래야 껴버지 결혼에 지로치 세아스고로 전시스 군도 상라 다니 부세 군도 상고 전시스 군도 상벌라 다기 류 롱주 차상라니 야 부기 인세 부기 회사의 울세
One here, and on the second line, to Samantabhadra, I give myself, this comes from first having generated fear for either suffering of the lower realms, or most probably fear for suffering of samsara in its entirety. One has faith that this great Bodhisattva Samantabhadra can guide one, and thereby one will gain protection from suffering. With this refuge having been generated through the two causes of fear and faith, one turns to Samantabhadra and gives myself. So here we make offerings to Samantabhadra, offerings based on our confidence that he can guide us to gain protecting refuge. We offer our possessions, we offer our material resources, we offer our body. And we not only make these offerings, but we do so as to accumulate virtue as the antidote for our past non-virtue. So therefore, this is part of the practice of confession, where we're confessing past misdeeds, and to purify, we're making offerings of ourselves, giving us our resources, giving our body.
Bulma ul said mato jap said six dwell shulia jap sol said jap said jabroche says yungor that Tinma Chidan Shu de la Dandala delia, Janus Mukun Sambola, Tagi Lu Longe Chasa, Pune, Pugin Jazanga, Muntivale, and a Kuru Dungale, Job to Solo said, Si Shula, Della, Job to Sol say Yungor dele.
So we should understand that whilst the word refuge isn't mentioned here, but it's implicitly implied that one is going to these great bodhisattvas for refuge.
The name Jembe Yala Danyi, Dagi Ludi Ulwarki, Sideda, and Jembe Yang, Jason Jembe Yala, and Dagi Ludi, and it changes some Kundasabur Fuba and Haji Dagi Ludi, the she. Dani Chiba Namjani said the Chazan Chibareda, Chazan Karjan Pugers and Dani, Kova, and Masu Dungali Chiba, Kitchen Nagi, Dungali, Pa Gene, they let the Matana Dungali on the Pesagres and Bengangra, Shanagitone, and Ya, changes some Kunda sample like Jepso, Lulo, Pua, Nashi, and Jason Jambela Yalaya, and Chige Sosuki, Lulo. Telecup anybody that Chisin Jambe Yala Yor changes Jambe Gubri SMB Yiche Helen Betam Tamje Tone, so to Lulon Chasan, Chisin Jambe Yala Pugi Insuran, Jambe Yala, Danyi, Dagulu Ulor Yise.
And the verse continues, to Manchugosha, of my own accord, I offer this body of mine. So this is a continuation, but with the same understanding as in the first two lines. Already having generated fear for the sufferings of samsara, with faith one turns to Manjushri, and one makes offerings of all one's resources and one's body as well to Manjushri in order to purify past misdeeds. So one makes offerings and confesses past misdeeds.
Jamro Son, the some Danta, the Labgor, what in my some Kanistan wars in a Dustangu race or dinner time, GP Namdra, GP Namdrapik, Chikia, Tiungri said. That kind of some Dani is the Sosora, some Dorada, Sosora, Chedi, Nenaze Dunga, and the Chivi Dunga, and Chine Bardoke, Bardu Dunga, and Jewa Chimanga, Son, the Jevan and Anson Kivi Dunga. And the GTM began take a Sudan Sumela Kevana, Koala, Kando Kevana, Dunga Yores and began Dunga Jurim Dike, some died. Because in good deeper saw you by Jebu Dunga Dike, Yungo Dunga Yungo Chagor was a Dane Chipa. Dinashin, the Rang Chibu, some Mata, the Semja Tamje, Semja Kandishine, Tangazuki, Dushine, Nazo Tonchos Yabadilla, Dundo Rigine, Benet Jipa, and Nazu Tonsis, Jimmy, Ju. And it's a pa Ju, pa Judu, and the college Shana, Amdra, Yungruata, Chesan Chiba, Sitapa, Denegi, Shana, Sheva, Jina Yungura, Jiba Yungurwa, Denegi, and Dimension as a millionaire, and Jige, Chicken, Nenaze, Kendeta, Denega Ganga, Jiba, Nenaziki Jiba, and Chu Jiba, me Jiba, Meba, the Mezio, the Jiba Yana, and Dimen Bigeta, Marchuda, Denichid. That Mida, Dundrodan, Kawa, some Damine, Ganga Yuba Shushi, Tonga, Sedelia, some Damine, Ganga Yuba Shushi, Yubadi, Manzuki, Tungorva, Dine some night, Rangli in that Dunga, Shelley in there, Mida, Dundro Sulina, Ganga Yungu, Dine Yubadi Tonga, Digumzen Geneda, and there's a good idea, Yama, Manzuki, Dibada, Denigil, Legi, Topi, Chungu Banza. The names are the digums sometimes, me, Matonagida, Sasiada, that Chike, Hamain said, on this consul Ganga Yoba, the Dungo Yoba, and Dimash that me, Motova, the Yawa Siada, the Niki, the Sapchamakia, and the Yawa Kia, and Masolka, the Nigga Dunga Patma, Yoruba, Sempica, some Tavena, And the nigga dunga di pa some dadu, Maranzuki, Sosolia, Dunga Jumi, Dunga Jumsenche, and Shem, Maranzu that Sedelia, also Tondige, Shandala, Kanga, Karakar, Yungu, but do some dadu, the Shanda, Shana, Kangamda, but D. Jumsenche, Nekiawa Chimang, Asona Kavana, Dile Dunga Che, and Dile Kavana, Nyawada, Idada, Nyawan Majavan, Dile Dunga Che, Yorwa, some and the nigga sometimes. The Howard said the leader, Numo, Kawaja, Lemene, Dungadi, Vajaya, Resha, some big, sometimes at that Dimati, the nigga to get that Kanga Redo, some big, Jivachine, Jivachi, Dene, Delia, that the Nekanga, so the Nakia on that, then Karachi Horus. She's not that mission that Shanda Simja, you do not part of me, but it doesn't. The Nishi Semlia. Namdrada, the Niki, that delayed Matan the top menu, some big, some logic. That Dushan some died, and Dungala Tarduga, some nodi, Shukshimbushi let go. Delay the Dana, do some Tana Tamna, can still cube in Nuba, suit cube grill up to Dana kissing Sanja and Jensen, but conscious Sasa that did delay Jensen Mukundu Sambo cube in Nuba Yores. Jensen Mukundu Sambo said, Chikron Ninja com, Jenny Ninja. Jamnijo Comje, Yamlenji, the Janjusim Guleke, the Nigi, Janjusim Bijuba, Yamlenji, you can be Molam, Janjusim be Molam Jet, Simja Tam, Chidana Molam Jachimbu, Janjusim be Molam, two, Dubduhin, Nuba Yeting, Janjusim Bakun, the Nede, send the Corona Cubi Nuba Yore, some jet in the Coron, Yoguri, some biggie, each Dam Jaja, and Sosugi, Lu Launcher, Chasa Pu, some be, and ya. Dictionary Mabache, and Pu, some be Puage, and then is that Korea Dunga Delia, Ma, Jobroche, Sangadunga, Randa, Simjan Tamje, Korea Dunga Delia, Jobto, so Kurama Jobroche, said Dusine, Tikasore, some Tango says, there's some Dana Rouge, Dushore, Sungorvada.
With the verses in this section, one can all too easily just read through them quickly and move on in one's practice. But rather, I want you to understand well the way of thinking that one should generate in one's mind as one reads these verses, because then, as part of one's practice, they have a powerful impact. So we have here in this verse, it's very much talking in the first person. We see in the second line, I give myself. In the third line, of my own accord. In the fourth line, I offer this body of mine. So we should be taking these verses very personally as something that we ourselves are saying. We are turning here for protecting refuge to these great bodhisattvas, and we're doing so through having reflected well already on the sufferings of samsara, on the sufferings of samsara in various ways. We've reflected on the many sufferings of humans, of animals, of hell beings, as well as those of demigods and desire realm gods, and the sufferings of the gods in the higher realms too. So we've given rise to a fear for the sufferings of samsara ourselves, but not only that, we've already reflected, and here we generated again a recognition that in the same way that we are in a precarious position where our death can come at any time, and we may well fall to the lower realms and so have to suffer there due to the power of the non-virtue on our own continuum. That is the position for all other ordinary beings. Those in the higher realms now, death can befall them at any time, and they may well too, just like me, fall to the lower realms. And those beings who are suffering so intensely there already, death may well befall them, but they may stay bound in those suffering realms. So in this way, we're generating our understanding based on the fear for our own situation, but also recognizing the precariousness of the situation that others find themselves in too. And to engage in this meditation effectively and to generate these minds quickly, what I encourage you to do is in your daily life to keep the meaning of the Dharma in mind, because this means whatever you observe, you'll observe through the lens of your understanding of the Dharma. So for example, we can observe the suffering of animals despite not being of the animal realm ourselves, we can see how animals are often governed by fear, because they, in all reality, do nearly constantly face the danger of being hunted and caught and eaten alive by other animals. We can see how quickly animals' lifespans can come to an end, can suddenly come to an end, especially when we think very broadly across the various types of rebirths in the animal realm. Moreover, we can see how humans use animals for their own betterment, for example, as pack animals or as sources of food or clothing and so forth. We can also recognize how animals have such limited intelligence and very limited capacity to resolve their suffering. If they're ill, there's not much they can do about it. And then in terms also of what we observe in our own lived experience, not just looking at animals but other humans, being aware of the sufferings of other humans. We see this in what we see in the media, we see this what we observe amongst our friends and our family. The suffering of illness, the suffering of conflict, the suffering of physical decline through aging, and so forth. And all of these suffering experiences we should observe, and we should observe them through the lens of our understanding of dependent arising. Every experience of suffering is a result that has come about in dependence on causes. This is the story of samsara, this ongoing wheel of suffering that beings find themselves caught in, trapped in dependence on causes accumulated. Beings remain bound in samsara and continue to suffer. This is also the case for those for unseen beings, whether in the higher realms, the demigods, the gods, or the beings in the form and formless realms, or those in the lower realms, spirits and hell beings. All are suffering in the varying ways in accordance with the realm they find themselves in. We should also call to mind the suffering of the unseen beings in the lower realms, because their suffering is incomparable to anything that we can observe. And that is being experienced by beings right now, so many beings being tormented as spirits or as hell beings. So thinking like this will give rise to an emotional response. And if we have a sense of powerlessness arising, this feeling of what can I do about this, we should recognize that the situation of the vast number of beings is truly helpless. They are powerless to do anything about their situation. This is the case for almost all beings who find themselves bound in samsara. And that we should then take to give us courage. I now, someone who has met the Dharma, I have to do something about this. I have to help them. I have to help them. But right now, I am very limited. But I have met the Dharma. I've met the Buddhas and the great Bodhisattvas. So now I turn to you. And we've already looked in previous verses, 2 verses ago, looking at turning to the Buddhas. Now we're turning here to the great Bodhisattvas, these incredible beings such as Samantabhadra, Manjushri, and in subsequent verses others, who have all generated great compassion and developed it further to generate the actual mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. And not only have they generated uncontrived bodhicitta, but also the wisdom directly realizing emptiness. And all these great bodhisattvas, these Arya bodhisattvas, have also generated other tremendous qualities. Samantabhadra, he shows the example of a being who's made vast and expansive prayers for the welfare of sentient beings. So with him as the illustration, the example of the prayers that bodhisattvas make, we turn to Samantabhadra for guidance, for inspiration in our onward journey of spiritual development. We turn to these great bodhisattvas, requesting their guidance, their inspiration, so that we can develop inner qualities just like they have, and thereby not only attain our own liberation from suffering, but can skillfully guide all beings to bring an end to their suffering experiences in samsara. So these ways of thinking is how we should approach verses such as this one and those that will follow.
Denigi Randa Shen Semje Tamji and the Chiki Denigi and Jiba City on Bene Jiba de Chidang Shena, Jiba de la Guayarwa, the Anjik Manjiki Meva Susha the Jibarwa, the May Tiche, Swim Jalaro that in the May City, Meva said the May Jiba de la Rua, Chu Me Chalat and the Chu Jiba de la Rua, Chizan Chizada Katijigoras and Anjuki. Digi yoba de anzu ludi de leda nyomo ba ke dibo sa sha ba na dibi gyu de la de ne anzu dunga nyongo ya de ma nyawa da nga so dunro de ne gi dunga nyo cha san de le ne ki go ro ba sa de ne sam na de je sa da dunga anzu ge du chen ra na shen cha san dunga nyongo ya da de ne gi che ba du shin de su cha sa gyu leda nyomo ba le de ki go dibo le de ne dibi dibo re sam be sam na je sa da Dile Tago Sampe, Daddy, Dibadi, Jeba, Dimino Sampeke, some go, that Dimino Jesati, Maji was a dele the Tago to Sampe some time, didn't Gabadi Ligorova. Chisnada dele Tago Sampeta, Mahobana, Jimmy, Sampe, some Lojungorova, Chisda, Chinchi, Tom Semse, Ligorova. Chisnada, Ding you topsy the Helecubi, Nubosu, Sulu, your resident, and Samba Kundu Sambo, Chisin Jembe, and your resident, that could Chisin Jembe, and Chisin Kundu Sambo, Ding you top Charugorova, and Dineza Delia, that you be Nuba, Yiche Bigeta, Kuburis Yiche, Tamja, Kalinja, Kalime, Tamja, Digeta, Nimbu top Chagura, Nimbu top Chagura, and Delia, Susu, Longe, Chazam, Puije, and that Capsudu, the Jabrugi Labjet, Labgin Sempeda, Susuki, some Deva, Gawa Kardubine, that's Nimbu top Chagura, Nimbu top Shukone, that Shabe, Diva Shapa said, Dushin the Chazan, Dushin the Sawa Chagore.
So when reflecting in the way I'm advising here, one does so in relation to one's own lived experience, generating fear for one's own potential ongoing suffering, and that this may even have to be experienced in the lower realms. But one also does so with the understanding of others, that this is the very situation that others find themselves in. Those in the higher realms on this precarious situation, just like us, that death can come at any moment, and we may fall into the lower realms, because we have those causes on our continuum. And there are many other beings who find themselves right now bound in the immense or intense pain of the lower realms. But furthermore, so there are several aspects mentioned here. First, in relation to oneself. Secondly, in relation to others. And that's in terms of fear for ongoing suffering. Then thirdly, to recognize that whenever we hear this word suffering, or we think of suffering, of any unwanted circumstance, what should also come to mind is that suffering is a result, which means it came about independent on a cause. This needs to come to mind too. So the first key aspect here is to reflect on this in a first-person capacity. This is my predicament. Secondly, others find themselves in this too. Thirdly, but this is a dependent arising. All suffering results came about in dependence on causes. So this third aspect of understanding that suffering is a dependent arising that has come about in dependence on causes, that should lead to a confidence arising. If something comes about in dependence on causes, it means that once the cause has ripened, it's exhausted. Moreover, through applying an antidote, unripened causes can be eradicated. Moreover, one can also bring about an end to the accumulation of such causes. So when we recognize that something is a dependent arising, such as suffering, we recognize that it's come about in dependence on causes, this should open up our vision that beyond fear to a confidence that can be, our situation can be radically transformed. Then we turn to Bodhisattvas, these great beings such as Samantabhadra and Manjushri. We turn to them for seeking refuge, seeking protecting refuge, which comes down which means we turn to them, trusting their guidance in terms of our own onward spiritual development. And this mind of a sincere refuge is not only one of the opponent powers, the power of the basis, but it can also work as the power of the antidote, because it is a virtuous mind, and any virtuous mind serves as an antidote. So by sincerely going for refuge, turning to these great bodhisattvas for guidance and inspiration in our spiritual journey, we serve already to purify misdeeds on our own continuum and strengthen our spiritual development with our determination to be of ever greater benefit to others.
that ulwarki sine pugi so da pugi sia chi chagorwa ulwari ul se di maungba ro chagore china pugi se da nge joral ya chala sti se choro de marwa na ngo so de se tigi se da tigi se de skarwa de ulwarki sine pugi se ore ul se da ma de da chisa jembe ala pugi chizun akase 우전지 좀 군도 잡으러 울 풀기 인세로 다 울기 울월기 제가 울세다 마음 받아 상이도 하다게 되나 부여지로 하다 제가 울세다 직직대 마음 받아 불세디 아보 불내나 다다와라서 저거를 그냥 안 주게 만데가데 신간 불월쇼 세데 다디 부기여시고로 와 제가 만데가블 신간 불월쇼 세데 부기여세 불식으로 다디 부기여서 ulwargi said, ul said, 62 monk basically, Dondala, the Dani Bull said, Kundusamba Dani ul said, Jambeyala, ulwargi said, which is ul said, and monk begins zero chagorage. Bugi in Sigurwa, Bulgi in Lagorwada. Najet has a Bulgi in Labdu and Azuki, then he take in Labdu the day, maybe Kishua. Then he take in chronology, taking the draw, may Pugi in Lago, Pugi incident, Mahomba, Pugi incident, and it prayer the leg deep figures in a karma chicken jella prayer yumure, and then you chicken jella prayer yumuru, and Dandala, that thing a Pugi in Siguro, the Pugi in the pre maybe number, the Priagi, the zero chagorwa. The Ul Labne Mahomba, Kawa Yeven at Sik. ul se do aj ul se do kawa yebe ne maung ba de ku re che de me che ul se six do dang bo de la ul ni ba de ul do ji ul se de maung ba si re se wil se de ji ba re je ul pulgi se Jingiga Jigbareche, Mahomba Jigbareche, Jambeyala Pugi, Kundusambola Pugi in the Gorwada, or the Jigbareche, Mahomba, Pugi in Pugi, or the Pusa maybe kiss or then.
We should change the translation in the second and fourth line. Both should be in the future tense. So to be filled with dread, overcome with anguish, to Samanta Bhadra, I will give myself. To Manjushri, of my own accord, I will offer this body of mine.
네, 결혼이야 거기 좀 지긴 랩도 다제야 말, 제 사람들 지긴 나요 말 봐다. 제 사람 하고 다들어. 당에 지긴 랩도 다디 감치치엘에 알람산 니숨치엘 난 감체가 주체가 돼야 상이도 돼야 여러 봐다. 지긴 랩도 다제사 또 울월기 있어, 울기 있어, 푸기 있어, 푸기 있는 거 봐다 가지고 그 다들 마소나 그 부에게 제지를 스마트 푸기 있어. 삼단 거까지 강아 동아 된데는 삼다 된데다 류로 쳐서 부이지는 게 안지 지긴 셈비가 다들 삼단 거로 삼나는 식으로 와서 대 직대 됐어 마음이 식으로 시해다.
So this should be expressed in the future tense, although when one says future tense, perhaps what comes to mind is something in the distant future, but that isn't necessarily meant. Future can mean in the next moment. For example, if you offer someone a coffee and you say, I will give you the coffee, that would be as soon as you've made it, so in a few minutes' time. So similarly here, we should this should be in the future tense, but that doesn't necessarily mean in the distant future.
Andine Are 당이 라이 디갈라고 해서다 당한 중에 멘데 피디갑라 불월기라고 그러다 가지 불월기세 지금 부기에서 다른 것을 비교하러 와다 멘데 피디갑라 가지고 것을 비교하러 와다 지금 불월기라고 그래 울월기라나 망어봐 이 피기인세에 차이거로 와 근데 멘데 피디갑라 가지고 울월기세 부기에서 가지고 그러다 피기에 이제 디다다와라 차려다 이 고비치 파케진 양이 결혼을 뛰어야지 오늘 무슨 다들 뛰거와 뛰어다 생이 결혼 고비 뛰어야는데 무슨 뛰거로 와다로와 제자디 디나싱 가지고 만들 피디갑라 난주기 지 불월기 있어야지 불월기 있어야 울세야 말아지 불세식티 비슷한 거 가서 무슨 피진백가로 와다 피거로 와다 가지고 안데 랍나디 거데 가서 니스 하고 내라고 얼어봐 돼. 내가 말. 말에 델 만제 민도 와드네. 이 만제 교시도 아주 만제 피디갑라 신경 불어 쇼서 신경 불어 쇼라기도 와. 네가서 다딩 아주 피신백가로 진짜 신경 불어 쇼서 맞도 신경 울어 쇼라기도 와. 진짜 디세워데. 진짜 아주 만제 피디갑라 신경 불어 쇼라도 다들 피신백가로니까 그 다다웨 시긴자데 몽어바 sig마자제 다다와나자 불월기 쇼선 불월기 세트나 거래제.
So I don't know if this has much interest, but anyway, when we offer a mandala, this is using the present tense. So we are offering a mandala, whereas what's said here should be translated as in the future tense.
Yeah, it's sikdele ditse kebar chungure. Andire 나네네 투지 죄바 마트와세 다 젠데실이야 안에 자체 캡수줘야 시고래 다 투지 죄바 마트와 젠데시고 데라야 냠다 마르 외데베 디진달라 캡도소스.
In the 50th verse, to the protector Chenrezig, whose compassionate action is unmistaken, weak and wretched, I also cry out for help. Please provide me, a wrongdoer, with protecting refuge.
다 투지 죄바 마트와 세대 투지에 세대 다 바바젠데 세세디 장장아제 젠데시게 계시로 주고로 와다 연대로 kö지마서나 지나다 제주sem바 안잠니제 배지 투지 제주셈 가서 잠바다 닝지sem보 곰베고 곰 되네게 닝지sem바 냠서练习베게 바바 젠데스데 니치마 냠서 练 주도시네 셈자 탐지를 뒤다 남바콘도 제외 파시시네 셈자 탐지 동화다 그디 자기는 셈자 대화다 댐바지 고우도 제자 셈자 동화다 다야야 배직 제와 침부시 우주 투지기 제외 왕게 되네 죄바 맞춰봐세데 되네 되네기 류가기 죄배团에 동화세야단 디기 주베게 탑람 주야야 안데 마노 마추와 제 도시네 안데 가소레 시행기 된달이야 도시는 지고래 사지 기술없이 연대로 지고로 하다.
Tibetan, the first line is our second line, whose compassionate action is unmistaken. This great Bodhisattva has of course developed the strongest form of very powerful compassion for all sentient beings equally without exception. So Chenrezig holds in his heart all sentient beings without exception, and through the power of his compassion, when he engages in action, physical, verbal action, this is unmistaken or flawless.
내게 두지 죄바 맞춰와서 죄바 세딩 아주 륜하게 죄바 용구로와 륜하게 죄바 용구래 그래서 다들 가서는 셴랴 셴 셈자 탐절에 인지 셴보고 인지의 상황도 손에 셴랴는 류당아 거네 죄바 맞춰와 맞춰봐 전 셴랴 최대야다 안 주신 전도 셴유 동화세 디기 주야랴 안도 셴는 거래서지 되네지 고고를 대다다 죄바 맞추어서 대한 죄바 들려야 전주심비 죄바 파신 주게 냠는 만화와 맞추바 소소 냠는지 셴리아 안 생기 동안 세야다 디기 주비알라도 신난 거래 세지 되네야 고시고로와
compassionate action here we should understand being the physical behavior and verbal speech of the Bodhisattva. This behavior is flawless. So too are the various expressions of the six perfections that Chenrezig engages in. These too are unmistaken.
Gombe Topye and Gombala Dine Shay Dunga da Saya and Digi and Chedo and Cheba Matua Cheshalia Dusine and Dungas Digi Dichigor. Then the Gender 60 to do the number Kundu, Shengi Dun Duvia, the Dunga Sayalpa, Kidi Nadushin as Passion, Di Dondalia and Dusine. Shen Dugores Teza, on the Shen Dunga said, Shen Semjatamji Digi Duvia, Dunga said, Send a Digi to Tarbatamji Kimbo Walia, taking Guenries, Guenries, Chazan Della Young said, Della Young Garchorson, that Deji Young said Luma Yisum Yugone, that Duchene, because a Lu logic is such as a preaching and Japsutra Della Young city. Della Young Ladu, Deji Janju Sembakundo Sambodan, Janju San Janju Sem Casa, Chisin Jembe and Lu Longe Chazan Pugin la son. Della Young so the Gendesila Young Pugin order, Chazan Pugin order. Della Young city. Deji Young said the Gangi le Pua Maze, Gendesila Pugin order.
So looking at the first two lines then, to the protector Chenrezig, whose compassionate action is unmistaken. So Chenrezig, through his incredible compassion, he is engaging in activities, physical and verbal, to benefit all sentient beings, unmistaken activities to benefit all sentient beings at all times, ever present, always, acting to help beings, guiding them in particular to cultivate the causes that will lead to their attainment of protection from suffering. In other words, to radically transform their mind so that they no longer suffer, they gain freedom from suffering. And while it's not explicitly stated here, but to the protector Chenrezig, one makes offerings, as mentioned before. One offers one's resources and body.
Nyamda ngare wede be sidida denigi sam dadushine diji gale samdana dane jiba namda ne se samdana jiba reda di chasan dane jiba namda ne sudu di japsu de gyudi jiba wa kawan jizun jembe la japsu dane jiba namda se di denigi samda je jizun jembe la japsu do dane jiba namda wa samda je ane chen sempogun do sambola japsu do dane jiba namda wa de Denige samdang tone, and Papa Genesis like Abstract Chagorwa. Jesa Denige Nyamda Maru Vedi Bela de Karsur Deji, Nazu Korige, Dunga, Nyotana, Jiba, Dunga, Denidona, Dius, the Samdang Ducala, Denepene, Nyamtaba, Kanga, Lundio Bade. That is also around Zugi Miria, Denige Kana Yomardine, do something Yawada, Yidada, Dundrola Soba, Denige, and the mean. Kangana Chudige, Yamtaba, Chazan Yamtaba, Denigi, and Yamda said Benyamdaba, Kanga, Shurishas, Chazan Denigi, and Maro, where do you be in Kitchen? Oh, that a Genesis, Jugume Sages, and as a key Java, the Chibasho, and Maro, where do you be in Ben Yamtaba, Kanga, Shurisha, Denigi, Gadi, Pajik, Kurongi, Tapa, Jorochi, Saji, Paki, Japjalava, the Chibar, Yamda, where do you be? And Disha said, Leanga Banyama Diva Sashi Big Diva the Dene, but Denigi, Mombana, Denidunga, Mogaya, Ganga Tema, Jabroche said Pa, Andushin, Dizentala, Jabduso said Sungore. And the young had been mission next to Scott. Eh, Nakanga to kill this Robert as a gay gas, or Ondunation. 냠나가를 외대베제 세디 아주 그배 동화되게 삼다데 냠다와 강아 쉬우르서 다 파바전에서 교교로시 세디 파기에로 잡제 두시네 내가 아주 배 디바데 템바 규테네제 데레 세고도 데레 교로치 세지 디젠달라 잡도서 세지.
Look at the third and fourth line. Weak and wretched, I also cry out for help. Please provide me, a wrongdoer, with protecting refuge. So we imagine here, just like in our everyday life, when a sudden crisis befalls us, we will cry out to a friend, please come now, please help me right now. So this is the situation where we recognize that we are weak and wretched. So what this refers to is that we are continually subject to problems, sufferings, and difficulties befalling us. This is the position that ourselves and all other suffering beings find ourselves in. So in this way, we are weak and wretched, and we cry out for help to Chenrezig, and as before to Samantabhadra and Manjughosha, to all 8 of these 8 great bodhisattvas. We cry to them, come to us, help us, guide us. And as it says in the 4th line, please provide me, a wrongdoer, with protecting refuge. So we should relate to this in the same way that we call out to a friend when in difficulty. So too, with a mind of refuge that is sincere, turns for guidance to the 3 jewels, to these great bodhisattvas, to help us in our process of spiritual development, to no longer be weak and wretched, but to gain freedom from suffering.
데 냠다바스네 강아시우 체제바디진 베나가 저기 디니게 강아시우 체제견진 알로고 지로지 에사디 교로치에서 얘기로 베네 추주 추키르고 베나 데네 베네 메 데사다 지금 메망부 치게자 데네 강반날 미주네 강부 차사 메발 겨도 미디 디나라도 아 교로치에서 계시우 얘기로 하다 공암자다 신아시우지는 냠다와 슈전 대교로치에서 얘기로 와 데네게 저랑 아주 데네 르르르치네 내가 결혼을 하고 지는 지투서에서는 계시 전부라 시마도 되면 말아 세상 데네게 강아시우 강을 냠나 직례도 qabla 아당아 교로치에서 얘기합죠로 언디나시 다데 아주도 삼다시 코위 둥아 안지게 냐와다 이다다 데니게 둥아도 세삼다 데스차사 유미가와 디발레트네 기고로 세사 데니게 또 선지데 데니 다 소소라나데 데니게 냠다과를 강아 채우면에 다데 데니게 둥아 뇽시 냠다과 시우주여로 와다 셈제 망부여로 와 데니게 냠다과 둥아 강아 시우리도 와 모바나 소소이네 디바 침부사 디바 마샤바네 데니치를 끼네 데 냠다과 차기로 와 선비게 데니게 삼다네 다 라셰 냠다베 셈전 탐지 동화들 차고도 될래야 결혼 교육이 바바천스 결혼 교육 누바 여러 결혼 투지 첨보다 내발에 결혼이 교로체 사이드 도시네 슈고르다 된다래 도시네 삼다야 된가도 도시네 삼다지도 지상 삼당고 그래서 그러다.
We can call to mind a situation, perhaps you're at home and suddenly the stove catches fire and you have a fire blazing in your home. And you're not then going to amble out of your kitchen, go to the people you live with and politely request their assistance when they have time. Rather, there'll be a sense of urgency and determination. Come right now, I need you right now. So this then we should understand as to be the strength of mind we're striving to develop here. The strength of mind that will come about in dependence on clearly recognizing our perilous situation. The situation where on our own we are weak and feeble to resist the sufferings of samsara. We have come to recognize our sufferings, problems and difficulties continuously befall us, and we cannot protect ourselves from these. We need help. We need the help of these great bodhisattvas. We need their skillful guidance to help us in our perilous situation. This perilous situation which is shared by all other suffering mother sentient beings.
나가지 량한도 도시네 점주 접수 조제 디바샤에 도시 삼다에 갑라 아지 아주게 그치 동아디게 동아야게 주간에 간데 동아 간에 간데 세베 동아디게 바 뭐송 Tene dunga yonge yu karele tene yungu ya paso yu tene sili yungu pate di hago wache goreso donda di sungu warda kanche di samdangu gores di hago bayana dela tardiyo ke samba dili gires jisna di gyobe nubade ka di tari dela tariyage tapshi kani dukse jeba dili gores di hago yana ani janshi samba di soli yoba hago yode an dela ya yi chebeke ani chigi 이체다 겸로들이 거래스 지사다 마음반에 지금에 선배 준 거래스 되니기 진짜다 안 저기 지바로 받아 안 저기 코알에 타되게 예중 공부하라 코비기 교인디다 하고 그래 교인디 하고 교인이 가르가르 하고 네 용타한테 규디 가르가르 여바다 하고 디바야게 바야게 탈바 되니 리거와 되네 자데 아젤레 돈다라 안 저기 체디 안지게 안지바 아니 콜비까지 배는 중위 지바 사염이 지바다 미 지바다 안절이 두치는 지바진 강아 망보 레비오 바다 안디나신 직펀주 지지리아 마초게제 마초지는 마게 지게 천지에 돈에 강아 지바 되는 연구요래 안디 매비게 내암다 되는 게 돈에 지바 연구요래 다도 지바게 코발에 끼친제날 소수기 통주수기 받았다 말은 소수리아 지바 되는게 지 망보 연구도 와서 비게 되는게 삼다 계속 아니 디주 차상 아니 가르선 유 아니 시간 저기 냐마 미게외 사바 유 야보지 메바 델레티네 뇽모베 온게지 용고로 와서 비게 되는 유텔의 용고래 디나신 다도 신은 아주 통쇼지 디마통와데 개와 치마가 소다 냐와다 이다다 둔로세야디 바다베네 둔로야 아주 통고로 와다 둔로야다 베네 냐로 비쌈다베데 님메 따와 냐디게 주 안지게 밤 주야다 아니가시 두주여데 갑라 안에 가시네 안에 가서래 짜기 짜규로 따지 카나 바라 카나 바주 수여데 나제가지 등거래 되네야天气로 되게 콜레시나 남다 가지 거래 대야 치료 차 케사제 안치료 샤데 안주야고 메데 다 강아 가지 거래 안데네지도 안지 강 가시 마시간이나 dum네 되네지도 안데네 강아 가지 남다 시시나 쉬용거로 왔으면 두신에 삼다 되네게 강아 두었으면 디스차사다 유 녀모베 원래된 용거래스 지고디네 디나시다 딩아주 통달라 마통하다 디레 두가 냐와다 이다다 디솔야 딜레 강아 체여와 선배 삼다에도 오 디네게 강아 데르다 디네레도 와선배 인지바 세데 디네게 삼다 디네 오다 디네게 제나 다 딜레데 마탄데 지금나 랑사데 랑심제 탐제 코유 동안 데솔레데 타고고도 딜레 마탄 탐미도 딜레 타베게다 께베 니바 술려스네 다치 산지 컨트롤 산지라 소베게다 전시 셈보군도 삼보다 코노조 께레 요레 코노조 요레 제상 코노조레 툭 제와 인지심 보고 진짜 나중에 껴빈 니버여바 껴그리 선배 이세 남자 케일에 류로저 찾아 표시는 안에 야 겹수 두기 선배게 다 표현은 겹수 좋아하면서 겹르기 납자 마 남는 제바들 소수기 보다 바다 냠는 지는 냠는 탈친 바제는 아니 거기 동안을 좋아제 라야 저 샤심제 탐제 이 코발을 좋아 지긴 선배게다 도시는 삼당고 오래서 송고다도 난인 보러지죠
Whenever we ourselves experience suffering or we observe suffering, we need to remind ourselves this experience of suffering is a result of causes that I myself or another being who is experiencing that suffering has accumulated. This has come about independent on causes that we ourselves have accumulated. Therefore, because it's a dependency, liberation is possible. So we need to, by keeping this all in mind, it serves, one, to recognize why we're in the situation we're in, but two, to give us a confidence that liberation is possible, and it's possible for us and others too. We should use that then as encouragement to, through recognizing that we are, every suffering experience has come about independence on causes, we can therefore strive to abandon similar causes and rather cultivate virtuous ways of thinking, causes that will lead to lasting happiness. So the first step is the first point is every time we experience or observe suffering, to recognize it came about in dependence on causes. Then secondly, that means liberation is possible because it is a dependence arising. Thirdly, we turn, because this is in the context of the opponent power or the antidote of it's in the context of going for refuge as part of confession. We then turn towards the sources of our refuge, in this case the great Bodhisattvas, requesting their assistance, their guidance from these great Bodhisattvas. And this is, you would have heard a presentation just like this in the general Lamrim presentations, where that in order to cultivate definite emergence or renunciation, one needs to recognize first the causes of of suffering of samsara. So through recognizing the causes of the suffering of samsara, we come to recognize that we can eradicate these causes and gain freedom. Because every cause that leads to suffering was accumulated, infused with afflictions. Afflictions, then, are what cause all our suffering. And again, to emphasize, when we observe suffering that's being experienced by others, use this to recognize why beings are suffering. And also to imagine if we were in those positions ourselves. So, for example, if one is watching a nature documentary, perhaps seeing the situation of fish, the presentation of the life experiences of animals all too often includes the killing of either, usually not of that animal, but of many others. For example, of fish, we see how they may be caught on a hook, and we can imagine that pain they experience. Others being caught in a net, confined, grouped together, and all will then get pulled out of the ocean or out of a lake, and they will then suffer thrashing about on the surface of a ship or on the side of a river, and they will die. Imagine this happening to us. Be aware that this is happening to Mother Sentient beings right now. We use this with our understanding of dependence arising, recognizing that these suffering situations have come about in dependence on causes. Therefore, beings can gain freedom from the situation. I can gain freedom from the situation. So how to do so? I need to turn to the great Bodhisattvas with sincere trust in their guidance. Turn to them for inspiration and strive to cultivate the Dharma within ourselves, because it's the Dharma which is their advice to us. So we commit to cultivating the Dharma ever more deeply within us. So this then is how we should utilize our understanding here in our everyday lives.
Desu chasangi gyu garal ligosan deja shida dimosum de rawata hajile di chesnada gyu deja shida dimosum de meba syogo resach tanju da denigi kanjele dunga dene samdang gore sedi daya jige dunga samdana je jige anjuge de semna pustoboro samdang gore skayo mare kasene 모신고고로 변하는 저기 마지게베네 소수기 자워디 모신고로와 지금 모신고를 될 마자고 마도 모마시나 마디메 잡투고 말와 디나신 하나 저기 계지게베네 먹어야 봐 차워디 게진디 야와 하도 통제 모마시마 마통외네 된디 장어서 두말와 마 예접유도 계시자유도 갈 쪽보 가와도 디하고 통고로 와디 통반에 디 먹어야 디마 차두고로 와 마통반에 디 차요 말 매버서 통말로 와 세상 안 저게 칼라로시네 디와 지기 사몰로 디 판모도 가르도 뭐 마시베네 아니 디 매버서 신말로 와 마선반에 안 진념도 사실 주불녀 디고로 세상 안 저게 칼라로시 살로야 가르도 사몰로야디 당보 사몰로 디디레세데 모신고도 모신고네 디장마 쇠제 아니 봐 안디 마녀바도 용투고로 예시로 잡으네 장모수에게 개인이 통고도 되게 모신고도 하모는 디 장모수 돼요 말로 디나신당 안솔 먹어야기 강아 요소에 규디 디디 강아 되는 용도 와서 강아디 삼다 이제 강아디 벤디 남가 추티버로 잡으네 추 강반 티버산 추 강아 되베네 대디 간에서 용고를 가와는 용고를 다 용서 다 하고 그러와 그 용서 다 하고는 용서 파 값셔버네 딘 추디 다다메가 세투고로 용에 강아디 세투고로 디나신 안주게 디네게 강아디기 두스 둥아디기 두스 랑을 중요하다 셴을 중요해 랑시 두신의 둥아디기 종타디기 용구도 와서 배 삼았다 디네 두가 삼단다 디 둥아디 유가를 디네 용고래서 유 녀몬 발에 디네 용고래서 녀몬 바 망보인다 된다라 되셔시다 디무숨 딜레디네 용고 다디메 봐서 그래서 제자다 디네 둥아에 유 녀몬 바딜레 겹겹도 쏘 시대야 파 차산 겹도 쏘 집에게 점주시어도 제자한테 결혼게 남된 정할이야 동아세기 누바디 결혼 요래시디 결혼게 세기 누바디 결혼에 로텐된 지기리에서 배 삼다에도 한 권어지길 냠는 지역이 림바 동아 되자시다 디모숨 빠야기 아니 제 롭된 지세 남된 지세 겨봐 될래야 또 배세지 후다바다진 라베기 배심슈디 침불리거와 제가 니 용야가 돈달라 아주 동아디게 지세 모처제 동아디 모처바자 하고 가지 진짜 동아 규디 칼칼이바 디 하고 가지 디 하고 해도 되네 마 아니 탑람 다 겹티 겸르티기 파 이게 된 거죠 상요고 송집에 될이야 아니 수신을 납 냠내지요도 네 될이야 강아지 세투고로 와다도 나 임보디로와
The suffering that we experience ourselves and the suffering that we observe in the world, this all comes about independence and causes that have been accumulated. And those causes will have been accumulated by minds dominated by the afflictions, in particular the three poisons of ignorance, anger, and attachment. And it's those that we need to strive to eliminate. So what I want to encourage you here is never to feel that this is beyond you, never to feel that the cultivation of these great minds of the Dharma within is something that maybe is for advice for others, but rather to understand it or take it as advice for you specifically. This is not beyond anyone here. What is required is to have knowledge about what to do. That is all. So, for example, there are many examples on our television screens of warfare in our world. And where we see two sides engaging in combat, they have identified their enemy they seek to eliminate. Or if we want to take an illustration that's perhaps not so aggressive, something closer to home, when we're going to clean something, we identify what it is that needs to be cleaned, and then we can successfully clean it. Or if you're going to prepare a meal, you identify what ingredients work well together to make a tasty and healthy meal, and then you can do so. This is the situation we find ourselves in now. You have the knowledge about what the causes of our suffering are, in particular those afflictions, and you also have knowledge about the antidotes, the various wholesome minds, virtuous minds to be cultivated and how to do so. Therefore, you have what is required, just like the soldier who has identified their enemy and now is engaging in action to eradicate their enemy. So too, you have a clear understanding that it is our own ignorance, anger, and attachment that causes our suffering. And this is also the case for others too. We have this knowledge that all suffering comes about in dependence on causes and therefore can be eradicated. And those causes are primarily the afflictions, and at the very root, it's these three poisons: ignorance and the resulting attachment and anger. We have this knowledge. With this knowledge, then, we go for refuge with the aspiration that I will rely on the jewels of refuge in order to guide me in my process of eliminating these three poisons. And their guidance is these very Dharma teachings. This is, through these Dharma teachings, the path that we need to cultivate within. is being illuminated. So all I need to do is continuing to gather this knowledge and then take this knowledge and cultivate it within, integrate it within. I just need to continue doing what I'm doing right now, receiving teachings and integrating those teachings. And by doing so, I will weaken and eventually eradicate the causes of suffering.
Dina jam shanlia jambatan sevi sam jambatan sewa komyata andina shin nga jugi jike dame ba dongba ni ko sam dabe na denigi anjige rangla nawa na shin chue kanishin na sosugi da zongi madi ba da dawo da cha nawa na shin ji kaya ji denigi nawa na shi gyudan jian gang lai ma do rang wen de zhu ba ji nawa na shin zao yin yo ma re san bi ge sam da ji du chi ne nga ji je ba sam da be na 동바 니고 삼다야다 데네게로 안디 잠바다 제와레 안데네게 라신이 마두베 촐이야 셈제시데 네바 딩이진이 바 도시네가 제곰도데 지곰바이나 안디기 저기 다 되샤 다 안디 그저 콘트로다 녀모바디게 안디 사바마게알이야 가도무 용고레 안디 지게 녀마게 사와이네 게베 뉴버 쉐베네 뉴버디 파니 So what we
need to eradicate is these three poisons, ignorance, anger, and attachment. What we need to cultivate is love and compassion. To the extent we develop a genuinely loving and compassionate attitude towards others, that will serve to prevent the arisal of anger. The stronger love, the stronger compassion, the less likely anger will be to arise. And in addition to love and compassion, it's indispensable we also cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness. All phenomena, whatever it is that we are thinking about, whatever it is that appears to our thought, whether it's something we're seeing or hearing or merely thinking about, it appears to our mind in a certain way, but it does not ultimately exist in that way. Everything is empty of existing in the way that it appears. So take that statement and then apply it. Everything, every friend, everything that you like, appears to your mind in a certain way. Investigate and come to recognize that all that you like, people, events, things, do not exist in the way they appear. And enemies, all those that you dislike, they appear to your mind in a particular way, and investigate and come to recognize that they too do not exist in the way they appear. Would express it differently. Everything that you like and everything that you dislike, take those one by one and see how it appears and investigate and come to recognize it does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. And to express it in a third way, everything that you have attachment towards, investigate that, as well as the mind of attachment itself, and recognize neither exist in the way that they appear. They are empty of so. And likewise, everything that you have aversion or frustration or anger towards, as well as that mind of aversion, anger, or frustration, investigate both the object and the consciousness, and recognize that they are empty too of existing in the way they appears. And in this way, you come to deepen your habituation to the understanding of reality. If you engage, to the extent that you engage in these meditations on love, compassion, and emptiness, to that extent, the afflictions will no longer arise, or when they do, they'll be weak, and they will easily dissipate. So therefore, having identified the enemy, what it is we need to eradicate, we now have also come to understand the antidotes, what we need to cultivate. And with this knowledge, we can all transform our minds. This is not beyond any of us. Then thank you very much. We can conclude there for tonight. Thank you. But if there are questions, then do feel free to ask. Okay. Then thank you.